Il Fantasma, the man you never saw coming, only felt when it was already too late. Matteo Rinaldi didn't need guns to make people disappear. He brought 3 dogs instead. Not pets, not guards. Weapons trained to kill on instinct. Everyone in Naples knew the rule. If the dogs moved, you were already dead. Until one night, inside a luxury restaurant soaked in fear and broken glass. A broke waitress did something no one had ever survived. She didn't run, she didn't scream, she knelt. One gesture, one sound, and 3 killing machines stopped mid-strike. The room froze. The dogs obeyed her. And for the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss in the city realized something terrifying. The monsters he controlled had just chosen a new master. That night didn't save her life. It rewrote her fate. Twist at the opening. The person Matteo intended to kill that night was never Chiara. The crash of porcelain against marble cut through Ristorante Impero like a gunshot. Crystal chandeliers trembled. Conversations died mid-sentence. In a room built to worship wealth and silence fear, chaos erupted in a single breath. Everyone knew what followed that sound. 3 shadows moved at once. Dante, Nero, and Virgil did not hesitate. They never did. Massive bodies surged from beneath the table. Muscle and instinct aligned with terrifying precision. Chairs scraped violently across the floor as diners scrambled back. Someone screamed. Someone prayed. Someone dropped to their knees without even knowing why. The target was not the waitress. It was the busboy. A skinny kid frozen near the fallen tray, eyes wide, feet glued to the floor, as if terror itself had taken hold of his bones. He stood exactly where he should not have been too close, too sudden, too loud. In the world Matteo Rinaldi ruled. That was enough to sign a death sentence. The dogs lunged, time fractured. In that fraction of a second, Chiara Mancini understood everything with brutal clarity. The distance, the speed, the inevitability. If she ran, the boy would die. If she screamed, the dogs would bite first and think later. If she froze, blood would stain the marble before anyone could blink. So she chose the only thing left. She dropped. Not backward, not away, down. Her knees hit the floor hard enough to sting, but she didn't flinch. She bowed her head, deliberately exposing the back of her neck, offering vulnerability instead of resistance. Her right hand lifted slowly, palm open, fingers steady. Then she made a sound low, controlled, almost musical. Not a word, not a cry. A measured exhale that sank beneath the growls, matching their rhythm before pulling it down, softer, slower. The sound of surrender. The sound she had once used with dogs that learned fear before trust. Dogs that had been beaten into obedience and forgotten how to stop. Dante skidded to a halt less than 2 feet from her face, claws carving white scars into the marble. Nero froze mid-stride. Virgil's jaws snapped shut inches from the air. The room stopped breathing. Chiara didn't look at their eyes. That would be a challenge. She focused on Dante's chest instead, watching the rise and fall beneath his scarred coat. She kept her posture neutral, her body loose, her pulse deliberately slow. Seduto, she whispered. The word barely traveled beyond her lips. Dante's ears flicked. The tension coiled in his massive frame wavered, then dissolved. He sat. Nero followed. Then Virgil. 3 monsters lowered to the floor as if pulled by invisible strings. Someone sobbed. Someone retched. At table 7, Matteo Rinaldi rose to his feet. He had commanded rooms into silence with a glance. He had ended lives with a nod. He had trained these dogs to respond to him alone, at a cost measured in blood and money and bodies that never made the papers. Yet when he lifted his hand, frozen halfway toward the gun hidden beneath his jacket, he did not speak. Because for the first time in his life, his voice did not matter. The dogs were no longer listening to him. Chiara remained on her knees, her hand still raised, her breathing even despite the thunder in her chest. Slowly, with movements calculated not to startle, she reached out and placed her palm flat against Dante's chest, right over his pounding heart. "Good," she murmured softly. "That's it. You're safe." Dante leaned into her touch. The sound of his tail hitting the floor once, heavy and deliberate, echoed louder than the shattered porcelain. Matteo stared. He had seen men beg for mercy. He had seen rivals offer their children in exchange for another breath. He had seen fear in every form imaginable. He had never seen this. A broke waitress kneeling on his marble floor. His dogs watching her like she was the axis their world had shifted around. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low, controlled, threaded with something dangerous, not anger, not desire, but fascination sharpened to a blade. Kiara looked up then, adrenaline still burning through her veins. Only now did the reality of where she was begin to settle in. The floor, the dogs, the man whose name people whispered like a curse. I'm sorry about the noise, sir," she said quickly, scrambling for the role that had kept her invisible this long. "I'll clean everything. Please don't fire me." Mateo's gaze flicked to the mess, then back to the dogs, who had not moved an inch away from her. A slow smile curved his mouth, predatory, curious. "Stand up," he said. Kiara tried. Dante growled. Not at her, at Mateo. The smile vanished from Mateo's face. "Dante," he commanded sharply. "Heel!" The dog didn't move. The silence that followed was absolute. Kiara reacted before she thought. She placed her hand back on Dante's shoulder, her touch gentle but assured. "Va!" she whispered. "Go." Immediately, all 3 dogs turned and trotted back beneath the table, settling into perfect formation. Obedient, calm, hers, Marco, the floor manager, rushed forward, pale and shaking. "Sir, I'm so sorry. She's new. She's fired. Get out, Kiara." "She's not fired." Mateo stepped over the debris, stopping inches from her. He smelled of espresso, gunpowder, and something darker control honed to cruelty. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and dropped a thick fold of cash onto her tray. "Finish your shift," he said quietly. "Tomorrow night, you work table 7. No one else comes near my table." Kiara nodded, unable to speak. As she turned away, she could feel his gaze burning into her back, heavy and deliberate. She thought she had survived the encounter. She was wrong. She had just auditioned for a role she never wanted and signed a contract written in blood and teeth. When her shift finally ended and she slipped out into the cold Neapolitan night, a black Mercedes waited in the alley. The door opened without a sound. Mateo sat inside. "Get in," he said. It was not a request. Kiara's blood turned to ice. "I need to go home," she whispered. "No," he replied calmly. "You don't." He leaned forward into the light, and for the first time she saw it clearly, not just power, but possession. Hunger sharpened by curiosity. "You have a gift, Kiara Mancini," he said, using her real name, the one she hadn't spoken in 6 months. "And I have 3 very expensive problems only you can solve." Her heart stopped. "How do you—" "I know everything," Mateo said. "About the warrant. About Detective Bianchi. About why you're running." He smiled. A wolf's smile. "Get in the car, and I make it all disappear. Refuse, and I make 1 call." Kiara looked at the open door, at the beast resting his head on the devil's knee, at the choice that was never really a choice at all. She got in. As the door closed and the car pulled away, Dante shifted his massive head from Mateo's lap to Kiara's thigh. The devil watched, and for the first time in a decade, Matteo Rinaldi felt something he had believed long dead. Envy. The monster had chosen a new master. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. The Mercedes moved through Naples like a secret sliding through narrow streets, its tinted windows swallowing the city's noise. Inside, silence pressed down heavier than fear. Kiara sat rigid against the leather seat, aware of every breath she took, every inch of space she occupied. Dante's weight rested against her thigh, solid and warm, as if he had decided without ceremony that she belonged there. Matteo watched from across the car, one hand on Nero's head. Virgil stretched like a living barrier at their feet. No one spoke. Nothing needed to be said. Kiara understood then that survival had changed shape. At the restaurant, it had been instinct and courage. Here, it was obedience measured against dignity. She kept her eyes forward, her posture careful, her mind racing through exits that did not exist. When the car passed through iron gates and climbed toward the hills, she felt something inside her loosen and tighten at the same time. The world she knew, cheap apartments, back alleys, constant movement, fell away behind stone walls and cameras that tracked their approach like predators with patience. The estate was not a home. It was a fortress pretending to be beautiful. Honey-colored stone, manicured gardens, lights arranged to flatter rather than illuminate. The driver opened her door. Kiara did not move. "I can't just disappear," she said quietly. "People will notice." Mateo stepped out and turned back to her, the night outlining him in sharp lines. "They already have," he replied. "Your landlord has been paid. Your belongings are being collected. By morning, it will be as if you planned this." Ice slid through her veins. Control, delivered with courtesy. He extended a hand. The dogs followed him without a glance back. "You have two choices," he continued, his voice even. "You can fight me, run from me, hate me, and you will still stay, because I need what you can do. Or you can accept that, for the first time in months, you are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, almost insulting. Safety had never been free. She looked at his hand, scarred, steady, capable of ending lives, and then at the dark beyond the gates. Kiara took it. Inside, marble swallowed sound. Paintings watched. Corridors unfolded with deliberate symmetry. Mateo did not lead her to a guest room. He took her to the kennels. They were not cages. They were rooms reinforced concrete, steel doors, climate-controlled, clean to the point of sterility. The dogs entered first, released from their collars. The moment the metal slipped free, the change was visible. Dante paced. Nero whined softly. Virgil lay down, then rose again, unable to settle. "They've been unpredictable," Mateo said, choosing the word like a concession. Lately, Kiara stepped forward before she realized she had decided to. Dante turned at once and pressed his massive head against her hip, seeking contact. She rested her palm along his spine, feeling the tension coiled beneath the muscle. "They're anxious," she said. "Not vicious." Mateo's jaw tightened. "I paid the best trainers in Europe. You paid people who teach dogs to attack." Kiara replied gently, "Not people who understand trauma." The word hung between them. Trauma. Mateo watched as she knelt, her movements unhurried, her presence softening the space. Dante's breathing slowed under her touch. "What happened to him?" she asked. His previous handler believed fear was respect. Mateo said. He was wrong. And the handler. A thin smile. Dante corrected him. Understanding crystallized. "You didn't buy these dogs as weapons," Kiara said slowly. "You rescued them. I gave them purpose." "No," she said, scratching behind Dante's ear as he leaned into her. "You gave them a different kind of prison." For a long moment, Mateo said nothing. Then he stepped closer, closing the distance until she could feel the heat of him. "Fix them," he said, "and I'll fix your problem." She should have been terrified. Instead, something like resolve took hold. "They need time," she said. Not commands, not pain. Time to learn that stopping doesn't mean dying. How long? "At least 3 months. You have 2? She met his eyes. "Then you'll fail." A pause, a recalculation. 2, he repeated, but his tone had shifted. Negotiation, not decree. That night, Kiara slept in a room larger than her old apartment, the sea visible beyond tall windows. She woke to silence so complete it felt unreal. At dawn. Lucia, the housekeeper, brought espresso and news delivered without judgment the dogs had refused to eat. They were waiting. When Kiara opened her door, she nearly tripped over Dante. He lay across the threshold like a guardian statue. Nero and Virgil flanking him. All 3 lifted their heads in unison. "Good morning," she murmured, crouching. Tails thumped, slow and heavy. "They've been there since 6, Mateo said from the hall. He approached without his jacket, sleeves rolled, looking almost human until the dogs pressed against Kiara's legs, forming a protective triangle. I tried to move them. Dante nearly took my hand. "He warned you," Kiara said. "There's a difference." They walked to a sunlit terrace set for breakfast. Mateo pulled out a chair for her. The gesture surprised her more than the guns she knew were hidden. "You're wondering why you're here," he said, pouring espresso. "Beyond the obvious being that you kidnapped me. I prefer strategically relocated." A hint of a smile. "You're an employee. Employees negotiate, then negotiate." She wrapped her hands around the cup, grounding herself. "I want my dogs to be controllable without being broken," Mateo said. "I want you to do what you did last night." "Why?" she asked. "If they're weapons, why does it matter?" Something flickered across his face, anger. Then something more complicated. Because weapons that can't be controlled become liabilities. And because Dante took 2 bullets meant for me 3 years ago. The admission landed softly and hard all at once. 2 months isn't enough, Chiara said. They need at least 4. You have 3. And when it's done, you can leave whenever you want, Mateo replied. Something tells me you won't. She thought of Bianchi's breath hot with whiskey, of planted evidence and closing cell doors. She thought of Dante's steady heart under her palm. 4 months, she said. In writing. Mateo extended his hand. 4. She shook it. Below the terrace, Rocco Santos watched through binoculars, his voice low as he radioed his team. The waitress is staying. Increase perimeter security. I want everything on her, especially why a cop wants her so badly. In the sunlight, Dante rested his head on Chiara's knee. She stroked his ear, unaware of the eyes measuring her from the shadows, unaware that safety, once offered, always came with a cost. The first week inside Matteo Rinaldi's estate rewired Chiara's sense of time. Days were measured not by clocks, but by breath, posture, distance. By the way Dante followed her from room to room, by how Nero watched doors instead of people, by how Virgil slept only when her shadow crossed the floor nearby. Nothing about them was accidental. Nothing about her presence was either. Matteo observed from a distance that was never accidental. He did not interfere, did not offer instructions, did not pretend to understand what he clearly did not. His interest sharpened the longer she worked. He noticed the rituals she built quietly, how she entered the kennels without sound, how she sat with her back to the wall so the dogs could see every angle, how she spoke less and waited more, control through absence, authority through calm. It unsettled him more than resistance ever could. On the 8th day, something went wrong. It was not dramatic. No screaming, no blood. Just a subtle shift. Dante froze mid-step, muscles locking, breath shallow. Nero's ears flattened. Virgil rose too fast, too alert. The old reflex surged back like a shadow waking up. Chiara felt it immediately. She moved without thinking, stepping between them and the noise beyond the gate, lowering her center of gravity, slowing her breath until it dragged theirs down with it. Her hand lifted, palm open, not commanding, inviting. It's all right, she murmured. Nothing's happening. Dante's eyes flicked past her shoulder. Matteo stood at the entrance. The tension snapped. Dante growled, low and warning, his body angling protectively in front of Chiara. Nero mirrored the stance. Virgil placed himself at her back. Matteo stopped. In that moment, the hierarchy was unmistakable. The dogs were not guarding him. They were guarding her from him. For the first time, Matteo felt something dangerously close to being displaced. Later that night, he summoned her to his study. The room smelled of leather and smoke, shadows stretching long across dark wood shelves lined with ledgers that never saw daylight. Chiara stood near the door, her posture respectful but unbowed. Matteo poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to her without asking. I don't drink, she said. He set it down without comment. You crossed a line today. So did you, she replied softly. His gaze sharpened. You allowed them to challenge me. I didn't allow anything, Chiara said. You walked into their space without warning. You became a trigger. Triggers can be trained out. Trauma can't. Silence expanded between them. Matteo studied her as if recalculating a weapon he had underestimated. You're not afraid of me, he said. I am. She answered honestly. That's why I'm careful. The truth disarmed him more than defiance would have. You said 4 months, he continued. You have 3 weeks to prove you're not wasting my time. Chiara met his eyes. Then stop undermining the process. His lips curved faintly. You speak like you own the room. I speak like someone who understands consequences. He laughed quietly, without humor. Careful. Men die for less, and dogs get broken for more, she replied. That night, she returned to her room exhausted, heart racing with the awareness that she was no longer simply surviving, she was negotiating power with a man who had never shared it. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it carried memories she had buried deep, hands gripping too hard, a badge flashing like permission, a voice promising protection before delivering ruin. She woke with her breath caught in her throat. Dante lay across the foot of her bed. She should have screamed. Instead, she sat up slowly, pressing her palm to his chest until the tremor in her hands stilled. He had not climbed onto the bed. He had positioned himself between her and the door. Protection, not possession. In the days that followed, Matteo kept his distance. Orders came through Rocco. The estate adjusted to Chiara's rhythms without comment. Staff learned not to interrupt when she worked. Doors opened quietly. Voices lowered in her presence. The dogs began to eat again. Then Rocco came to her himself. You know he's watching you, he said bluntly as they walked the southern corridor. Every move, every mistake. I know, Chiara replied. You also know this doesn't end cleanly. She stopped and faced him. You don't trust me. I don't trust anyone who survives my boss. A fair assessment. That evening, Matteo returned earlier than expected. He found Chiara sitting on the floor of the kennel, Dante's head in her lap, Nero asleep against her leg, Virgil watching the door with half-lidded eyes. The sight struck him harder than violence ever had. Peace, unguarded and unearned. They listen to you, he said. They feel safe with me. And me. They don't know what you want from them, Chiara answered. Neither do I. He crouched across from her, close enough that she could feel the weight of him. What do you want from me? The question slipped out before he could stop it. Chiara hesitated. Then consistency. And the truth. He exhaled slowly. Bianchi isn't just a problem you fix with money. I know, she said. I wasn't planning to. The promise beneath his words was dark and absolute. She should have recoiled. Instead, she felt something steadier take root. Hope sharpened by danger. Then we're aligned, she said. For now. Matteo rose, turning away before she could read his expression. Rocco will increase security. You stay inside the inner perimeter. I'm not a prisoner. No, he agreed. Your leverage. The word landed clean and cold. Later that night, as Chiara lay awake listening to the sea beyond the cliffs, she understood the truth she had been circling since the restaurant. Matteo Rinaldi did not save people. He acquired them. He did not offer safety. He negotiated survival. And yet, when Dante settled beside her bed again, calmer now, breathing deep and even, she wondered whether monsters could learn new rules if someone was willing to teach them where the line was, and how to stop before crossing it. Outside her door, guards changed shifts. Somewhere beyond the walls, a man with a badge traced her name on a list that was getting shorter. Inside the fortress, Chiara closed her eyes and made a promise she did not yet know how to keep. She would finish this, even if the price was learning how to stand between a devil and the things he loved, and convincing him that stopping did not mean losing everything. By the third week, the dogs began to change in ways no one had prepared Matteo Rinaldi to witness. Not obedience, not discipline, rest. It started subtly. Dante no longer paced the perimeter until his paws bled against stone. Nero stopped jerking awake at every distant sound. Virgil learned to lie on his side instead of curled tight, spine rigid as if expecting impact. They slept longer, ate slower, breathed deeper. Chiara noticed the shift before anyone else. She adjusted her routines accordingly, shortening sessions when their attention wavered, extending silence when their bodies asked for it. Training was no longer the goal. Regulation was. Teaching them that nothing happened when nothing happened. Matteo watched from the balcony above the kennels, arms folded, expression unreadable. He had expected progress to look like control-sharp responses, precise movements, loyalty reinforced through repetition. What he saw instead unsettled him far more. He saw trust. Dante lifted his head when Kiara entered, then rested it back down, confident she would come to him. Nero abandoned his post at the door to sit beside her, back turned to the world. Virgil, once hypervigilant, slept so deeply his breathing rattled softly against the concrete floor. They were no longer watching for orders. They were waiting for her presence. "That's not training," Matteo said later that evening as they walked the garden path overlooking the sea. "That's dependency." Kiara didn't slow her steps. "No, that's safety. Safety makes things weak." "No," she replied. "It makes them predictable." He stopped walking. She did too, turning to face him. The night wrapped around them, the distant sound of waves pressing against the cliffs like a pulse. "You've built your world on fear," she continued, her voice calm but firm. "Fear works. Until it doesn't. Until something breaks and doesn't know how to stop." Matteo studied her in silence. He did not interrupt. He rarely allowed anyone to finish sentences like that. "They don't need to be stronger," Kiara said. "They need permission to rest." "And what about you?" he asked. "Do you rest?" The question surprised her. "Not yet," she said after a moment. "I don't know if I can." That night, the estate was quieter than usual. Even the guards spoke in lowered voices, as if something fragile had taken root and might shatter if acknowledged too loudly. Matteo retreated to his study, but he did not work. He poured himself a drink and stared at nothing, replaying images he could not categorize as threat or weakness. The next morning, the call came early. Rocco's voice was tight, controlled. "We have a situation. A shipment had gone wrong. Not an ambush, worse. Uncertainty. A meeting scheduled off-site. Location compromised at the last minute." Matteo prepared to leave immediately. He didn't plan to bring the dogs. He rarely did anymore. As he passed the kennels, Dante rose and blocked his path. Not aggressively, deliberately. Matteo halted, irritation flaring. "Move!" The dog did not obey. Kiara emerged from the shadows moments later, sensing the shift before sound reached her. She placed herself beside Dante without touching him. "What's happening?" "He's not coming," Matteo said coldly. "They know something's wrong," Kiara replied. "Your energy changed. My energy doesn't matter. It does to them." Dante's body leaned subtly toward Kiara, then angled outward, positioning himself between her and Matteo. Nero mirrored him. Virgil moved behind her. Matteo felt it then sharp and undeniable. They were choosing her again. He clenched his jaw. "Call them off." Kiara hesitated. Then she looked at him fully. "I will. But you need to understand something first." His eyes narrowed. "You're testing me." "No," she said quietly. "They are." She placed a hand on Dante's neck, grounding him, then spoke softly. "It's all right. He's leaving. We're staying." The dogs relaxed. Matteo stared at her, something dark and volatile shifting behind his eyes. "You're blurring lines." "You drew them in blood," she replied. "I'm just showing you where they cut." He left without another word. Hours passed, then more. The sun dipped low, staining the horizon with fire. Kiara waited in the kennels, tension coiled tight beneath her calm. When the sound of engines finally echoed through the estate, she exhaled only because Dante did first. Matteo returned injured, not gravely, but enough. A shallow cut along his ribs, blood staining his shirt, a mistake he would never admit to anyone else. Kiara found him alone in the corridor, leaning against the wall, breath measured but strained. She didn't ask permission. She stepped close, guiding him to sit. "This stays between us," he said. "It always does," she replied. As she cleaned the wound, her hands steady, he watched her face focused, unafraid, intimate in a way violence never was. He noticed how she never flinched, never rushed, never treated him like something untouchable. "You don't look at me like the others," he said quietly. "How do they look at you like I'm inevitable? And how do I look at you?" She met his gaze. "Like you're human?" The word landed harder than any insult. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The space between them tightened, not with desire but recognition. Something dangerous and unspoken passed through the air, electric and restrained. That night, Kiara dreamed of locked doors opening without force. The following days brought subtle resistance from within the organization. Whispers, questions. Mateo's men noticed the dogs no longer responded the same way, that they deferred to Kiara without hesitation. Power, once singular, was redistributing. Rocco confronted Mateo privately. "You're letting her change the balance. I'm letting her fix a problem," Mateo replied. And if she becomes the problem, Mateo's answer came too fast. "Then I'll handle it, but later, alone." He wondered if that was still true. On the terrace, Kiara watched the dogs bask in the sun, their bodies loose, unguarded. She felt Mateo's presence before she saw him. "They trust you," he said. "They're learning to trust themselves." He looked at her, then not as leverage, not as a tool, but as a variable he could not fully control. "You're changing things," he said. She didn't deny it. "So are you." The admission settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Neither spoke of what it meant. Neither pretended it was harmless. Far beyond the estate walls, Detective Bianchi reviewed a file newly reopened, a familiar name circled in red. Inside the fortress, Kiara rested her hand on Dante's back and felt the steady rhythm of a heart that no longer expected pain at every sound. She knew this peace was temporary, and Matteo Rinaldi, watching her from the shadows, knew something worse. If he let this continue, he might not be able to take it back. The first sign that the outside world had begun to close in came quietly. A car lingered too long near the southern gate. A delivery arrived an hour early, its paperwork flawless and its driver unfamiliar. A guard reported the faint click of a frequency change on the perimeter scanners and was told, politely, to forget it. Rocco Santos did not forget. He stood on the upper balcony overlooking the estate grounds, binoculars steady in his hands, jaw set. From this height, everything looked calm. Too calm. Calm was never an accident. Below him, Kiara walked the dogs along the inner garden path. Dante moved at her left, Nero at her right, Virgil circling wide before returning to her side. Their formation was loose now, unforced, but unmistakably centered on her. They did not scan for threats. They scanned for her. Rocco lowered the binoculars. "She's becoming the Axis," he muttered. Matteo stood beside him, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the same scene. "She already is." Rocco turned sharply. "That's the problem." Matteo didn't respond. Later that afternoon, Rocco intercepted Kiara near the kennels. He didn't smile. He rarely did. "You know what you're standing in," he said without preamble. Kiara met his gaze evenly. "I know where I am. That's not the same thing." He studied her the way men like him studied battlefields mapping exits. Weaknesses, possibilities. People don't just stay here. They're kept. "I'm not being kept," she replied. Rocco's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Everyone says that. She didn't argue. She had learned when silence carried more weight than defense. "You're changing things," he continued. "Not just the dogs. Him. That wasn't the agreement." "No," Rocco said quietly. "But it's the consequence." That night, Matteo hosted a private meeting in the lower hall. 5 men, old money, older grudges, the kind of gathering that required precision and restraint. He ordered the dogs to remain behind. They did not. Dante followed him halfway down the corridor before stopping. Body tense, Nero paced. Virgil refused to lie down. Kiara felt the shift from 2 floors above. She found Matteo moments later, standing in the antechamber, irritation sharp in his posture. The dogs clustered at the threshold, unwilling to proceed. "They're sensing conflict," Kiara said. "Too many unknown variables." "They don't need to sense anything," Matteo snapped. "They need to obey." Dante growled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was disappointed. The room fell still. Kiara stepped forward slowly, placing herself between Matteo and the dogs, not blocking him, but anchoring the space. "They're not defying you," she said. "They're protecting what they consider stable." "And what is that?" Mateo asked coldly. She hesitated for half a second too long. "Me?" he finished. The words settled heavily between them. The meeting was postponed. That decision rippled outward with consequences no one could fully predict. Later, in the quiet that followed, Mateo confronted her in the courtyard, moonlight cutting sharp lines across his face. "You didn't warn me." "I didn't know." Kiara replied honestly. "They're adapting faster than expected." "To you, to safety," she corrected. "Which happens to include me." He searched her face, looking for manipulation, for ambition, for the hunger he recognized in himself. He found none of it. "You're becoming a liability," he said. "So are you," she answered softly. The admission stunned them both. The next morning, the attack came. Not on the estate. That would have been reckless. It came at Mateo's warehouse by the port, a probe, not a strike. Enough to send a message, enough to test response times. Mateo arrived within minutes, weapons drawn, orders snapping through comms. Kiara remained behind, the dogs restless without him. Dante paced until Kiara placed her hand on his chest, grounding him. "It's not for us," she murmured. "Not yet." An hour later, Mateo returned. This time, the injury was real. A graze along his shoulder, blood seeping through fabric, his breathing controlled but uneven. Kiara found him in the medical wing before anyone else did. "Sit," she said. He obeyed without comment. As she worked, her fingers careful, he watched her with an intensity that bordered on dangerous. "They were testing me," he said. "Who?" "People who think I've gone soft." Her hands stilled for a fraction of a second. "Have you?" Mateo's gaze dropped to where Dante lay at her feet, head resting against her calf, utterly calm despite the chaos outside. "I don't know," he admitted. The truth hung between them, raw and unguarded. That night, Kiara dreamed of a door left unlocked. The following days brought tension layered atop tension. Rocco's surveillance reports grew darker. Unknown frequencies. Tapped lines. A familiar name surfaced in whispered conversations. Detective Bianchi. Kiara felt it like a cold hand at the base of her spine. She confronted Mateo in his study, heart pounding but voice steady. "He's getting closer." "I know," Mateo replied. "He's been getting closer since the restaurant. I promised he wouldn't touch you." His eyes hardened. "That promise stands." At what cost? Mateo stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the weight of him, the dangerous pull that had been building between them. "Everything has a cost," he said. "The difference is who pays it." She looked up at him then, truly looked. At the man who commanded fear and now found himself negotiating with something far more dangerous connection. "I won't be the reason people die," she said quietly. "You already are," he replied. "You're just not used to seeing the ledger." The words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. That evening, Rocco confirmed it. Bianchi's making moves. He's not alone. Mateo turned to Kiara, expression unreadable. "You stay inside the inner perimeter. No exceptions." "I won't hide," she said. "You will," he countered. "Because if they take you, they win. And if you cage me," she replied, "you lose." The standoff lingered, electric and unresolved. Outside, the dogs sensed the fracture before it showed. Dante pressed closer to Kiara. Nero watched Mateo with new calculation. Virgil positioned himself between them, not choosing sides, but preparing. As night fell over the estate, Kiara stood on the terrace, the sea dark and restless below. She understood now that the danger wasn't just Bianchi, or rival factions, or the world beyond the gates. The danger was this: she had become something Matteo Rinaldi could not afford to lose. And the moment a man like him realizes that, love stops being a refuge and becomes a battlefield. The night after Matteo ordered Kiara confined to the inner perimeter, sleep abandoned them both. For Matteo, rest had always been a luxury he couldn't afford. Tonight, it felt like a weakness he could no longer control. He stood in his study long past midnight, staring at security feeds he had already memorized. Every angle of the estate, every shadow accounted for. And yet the sense of threat did not recede. It sharpened. Because this time, the danger was not approaching from outside the gates. It was already inside. Kiara lay awake as well, the sea breathing softly beyond the glass. Dante slept at the foot of her bed. Nero curled near the door. Virgil positioned in the narrow space between. Their presence was steady, grounding, but it did nothing to quiet the storm behind her ribs. Matteo's words replayed in her mind, not as orders, but as truths he hadn't meant to reveal. If they take you, they win. The realization was cold and clear. She was no longer collateral. She was leverage. At dawn, the estate woke to tension stretched too tight to ignore. Guards rotated faster. Rocco's voice crackled more frequently over the radios. Matteo left before breakfast, summoned by a situation he didn't explain. He did not take the dogs. The moment the gates closed behind his convoy, the shift was immediate. Dante rose, pacing once before stopping abruptly. Nero's ears flattened. Virgil moved closer to Kiara, pressing his weight against her leg. "They know," Lucia murmured from the doorway, unease threading her voice. "They don't like it when he leaves like this." Neither did Kiara. She followed the dogs to the kennel without thinking, moving through the space she had claimed as neutral ground. She sat on the floor, back against the wall, breathing slow until their agitation mirrored her calm. Dante rested his head on her knee, eyes fixed on the door. Nero lay beside her, tense but quiet. Virgil did not sit. The sound of engines shattered the stillness. Matteo returned before noon. He walked into the kennel under his own power, but the stiffness in his shoulders and the way he favored his right side told the story before the blood did. A dark stain spread beneath his jacket, soaking into the fabric like a confession. Kiara was on her feet instantly. "What happened?" she asked. "A misunderstanding," he replied curtly, already shrugging out of his jacket. She didn't argue. She guided him to the bench, her hands firm and practiced as she pressed cloth to the wound. The dogs circled once, then settled close. A silent perimeter. "This isn't shallow," she said quietly. "You should have called me. I handled it. You bled." A pause. Then, unexpectedly, a soft exhale that sounded like surrender. "I didn't want you there." The admission startled her more than anger would have. "Why?" she asked. "Because it wasn't clean." His jaw tightened. "Because I didn't want you to see what it costs." She looked at him then, really looked at the man who had built an empire on calculated brutality and was now measuring himself against her gaze. "I already know," she said. "I just don't pretend it's invisible." Her hands worked carefully, efficient, intimate in a way violence never was. Matteo watched her fingers, the steadiness, the absence of fear. No one had touched him like this without flinching in years. "Dante saved my life once," he said abruptly. She glanced up. "You mentioned. I never told you how." His voice was low, stripped of performance. "An assassin got past my security. 2 shots meant for my chest." Dante lunged before I could move. She imagined its speed, instinct, loyalty forged in chaos. "He took the bullets," Matteo continued. "He didn't hesitate. I owe him more than commands." Kiara finished bandaging and sat back on her heels. "Then let him stop when he needs to," she said. "Let all of you stop." The words lingered, dangerous in their simplicity. That afternoon, Matteo canceled meetings without explanation. The decision rippled outward, unsettling men who relied on his predictability. Rocco confronted him privately. "You're changing patterns," Rocco warned. "That makes people nervous." Matteo's response was sharp. Everyone should be nervous. And her. Rocco pressed. "She's becoming a fault line." Matteo didn't answer. Instead, he found Kiara at sunset on the terrace. The dogs sprawled lazily around her. The scene struck him with unexpected force. Peace. Unguarded. A life he had never allowed himself to imagine. "You should leave," he said without preamble. Kiara turned, surprised. "What?" "For a few days," he clarified. "Somewhere safe. Until I deal with this." "No," she replied immediately. "This isn't a request. And I'm not property," she said, standing. "You don't get to decide where I disappear to." His eyes darkened. "This is exactly why you should go." "And leave them," She gestured to the dogs, who had risen at her movement. "Leave you." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous. "You think I don't know what this is doing?" Mateo said finally. "You think I don't feel the shift every time they choose you? Every time I hesitate." "Hesitation isn't weakness," she replied. "It's awareness. It's a liability," he countered. "Only if you refuse to adapt." He stepped closer, close enough that the air between them tightened. For a moment, the world narrowed to breath and distance and the unspoken gravity pulling them together. "You're asking me to change the rules," he said. "No," Kiara answered softly. "I'm asking you to survive them." The dogs moved then, not aggressively but decisively. Dante positioned himself at Kiara's side. Nero angled toward Mateo, watchful. Virgil stood between them, a living line neither crossed. Mateo closed his eyes for a brief, unguarded second. When he opened them, something had shifted. "You stay," he said. "But you listen. The moment I say leave, you go." Kiara nodded, knowing the compromise for what it was, a fragile truce. That night, the estate slept lighter than usual, somewhere beyond the walls. Detective Bianchi finalized plans that no longer felt theoretical. Inside, Kiara lay awake, aware that the line between protection and possession was thinning by the hour. Beside her, Dante breathed deep and even, untroubled. And in another wing of the house, Matteo Rinaldi stared at the ceiling, finally admitting the truth he had avoided since the restaurant. He was no longer afraid of losing control. He was afraid of what he might become if he didn't. The call came just after midnight. Rocco's voice cut through the quiet with a sharpness that left no room for denial. "He's crossed the line!" Matteo was already on his feet before the sentence ended. The estate lights shifted automatically, perimeter protocols tightening like a fist. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened softly. Kiara stepped into the corridor, hair loose, eyes alert. She didn't ask what happened. She read it in the way Matteo's jaw locked, in the way the air itself seemed to recoil. "Bianca," she said. Rocco didn't bother pretending otherwise. "He made contact with one of our suppliers. Sloppy. On purpose. He wants you to know he's close." Kiara felt the familiar cold settle at the base of her spine, the echo of hands and threats she had tried to bury. Dante appeared at her side as if summoned by memory alone. Nero and Virgil followed, bodies tense, eyes sharp. Matteo turned to her. "You're staying inside? Now?" "No," she replied, just as quickly. I'm not hiding while you clean up a mess that exists because of me," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. "If he's hunting, then I won't pretend I'm prey." Matteo stared at her, 1,000 calculations racing behind his eyes. "You don't get to decide the terms." "I already did," she said quietly. "The moment I didn't run." The argument might have continued if the first shot hadn't shattered the night. It came from beyond the eastern wall, not aimed to kill. A warning, the kind meant to announce presence, to test response times. Alarms surged, guards moved, the dogs reacted instantly, bodies snapping into motion not toward the sound, but around Kiara. "They're triangulating," Rocco said sharply. "He's drawing us out." Matteo's phone buzzed in his hand. A message, brief and precise. "You can't hide her forever." Kiara closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. When she opened them, the decision had already settled. "He wants me," she said. "Let him think he has a chance." Matteo's voice dropped dangerously low. "Absolutely not." "You taught me how this world works," she replied. "Threats don't stop until you remove their incentive." "I remove threats," he said. "I don't gamble with lives." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then trust me." The word hung between them, heavier than any weapon. Rocco swore under his breath. "He's baiting you both." Matteo looked at the dogs, then back at Kiara. He saw the resolve there, the same steel that had stopped 3 killing machines in a restaurant full of blood and fear. He saw, with a clarity that terrified him, that if he locked her away now, he would lose her in a way no enemy could force. 10 minutes, he said finally. "You don't leave my sight." The trap sprang less than an hour later. A false breach at the south perimeter drew half the guards.
The real incursion came from the service road, a single vehicle, unmarked, moving too confidently to be a mistake. Mateo moved with practiced efficiency, positioning his men, controlling the chaos.
Kiara stayed close, every sense sharpened, the dogs flanking her like shadows. Then the shot rang out, not from the road, from above. The impact knocked Kiara backward, breath tearing from her lungs. Mateo felt it before he saw it, the shift in air, the absence where she should have been. Dante roared, a sound that split the night, and launched toward the tower. Kiara Mateo shouted, sprinting. She hit the ground hard, vision blurring. Pain flared along her ribs, sharp and bright. She tasted blood and fear and something worse, recognition. The silhouette at the railing leaned forward just enough for her to see the glint of a badge in the moonlight. "Hello, Kiara?" Bianchi called softly. "Miss me." The dogs reached her first. Dante positioned his body over hers, Nero snapping toward the tower, Virgil circling, frantic. Mateo skidded to a stop beside her, hands already checking for wounds. "Don't move," he said. "I'm fine," she lied. Bianca laughed. "Still protecting others. You never learn." Mateo's gaze lifted, lethal and focused. "You chose the wrong house. I chose the right weakness." Bianchi replied. "You think you own her now? You don't even know what she did to deserve me." Kiara pushed herself up despite the pain. "I told the truth," she said. "That's what you can't forgive." A pause. Then Bianchi's voice hardened. "You belong to me." Mateo moved. The next moments fractured into motion and sound. Orders barked. Gunfire erupted. The tower lights went dark as Mateo's men surged forward. Bianchi disappeared into the chaos, retreating with the speed of a man who had never intended to stay. When the night finally stilled, the damage remained. Kiara sat on the stone steps, wrapped in a blanket, ribs aching, Dante's head heavy in her lap. Mateo crouched in front of her, hands shaking as he inspected the bruise blooming beneath her collarbone. "You're hurt," he said. "I'm alive," she answered. He swallowed hard. "I should have sent you away and let him chase me alone," she shook her head. "This ends together." Rocco approached, face grim. Bianchi got away, but not clean. Mateo rose slowly, something cold and final settling over him. Then it's time. For what Kiara asked. For the kind of ending he won't survive. Mateo replied. Later. As dawn crept pale over the horizon, Kiara stood on the terrace, wrapped in silence and salt air. Mateo joined her without a word. The dogs lay at their feet, exhausted but calm, the storm spent for now. "He won't stop," she said softly. "No," Mateo agreed. "Neither will I." She turned to him then, seeing the cost etched into his face. "If you do this for me, I'm doing this because he crossed into my world," Mateo said. Then, after a pause, "And because he touched you." The admission was quiet, devastating. Kiara closed her eyes, leaning into the truth she could no longer deny. The hunt had come home. And in choosing to stand beside the devil, she had forced him to choose too. When Mateo reached for her hand, she did not pull away. Some battles are born of power. Others are born of love that refuses to hide. The morning after the attack carried a silence that felt heavier than gunfire. The estate moved with restrained efficiency. Broken stone was replaced. Blood was washed from marble before the sun fully rose. Guards rotated without complaint, eyes sharper, fingers closer to triggers. From the outside chamois, it looked like recovery. From within, it felt like preparation. Kiara woke with pain threading through her ribs and a weight pressed gently against her legs. Dante lay curled at her side, his body warm, breathing steady. Nero rested near the door, ears flicking at every distant sound. Virgil paced the length of the room once before settling at the window, watching the grounds with quiet vigilance. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Dante. The bruise along her collarbone had darkened overnight, spreading like ink beneath skin. It hurt when she breathed too deeply, but pain was familiar. Fear was not. What unsettled her was the certainty. Bianchi had crossed a line he could never uncross, and Mateo had answered it without hesitation. She found Mateo in the lower war room, surrounded by maps and screens, Rocco standing opposite him. Their voices dropped the moment she entered. "You shouldn't be up," Mateo said, his gaze immediately scanning her posture, her breathing. "I don't need to lie down to listen," she replied. Rocco shifted uncomfortably. "We're reviewing options." "No," Chiara said. "You're planning a war." Mateo didn't deny it. Bianchi made it public. He won't stop. And now he's brought others into it. "At what cost?" she asked quietly. He met her eyes. "Whatever it takes." The words were not a threat. They were a promise. Rocco cleared his throat. "There are consequences if we move openly. Allies will hesitate. Territory will shift." "I know," Mateo said. Chiara looked between them, the realization settling slowly and then all at once. "You're willing to lose ground." Mateo's jaw tightened. "Ground can be retaken. And lives." He didn't answer. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you do this for me, this isn't about you alone." He interrupted. Too quickly. "This is about control." She shook her head. "No, this is about protection. And you know the difference." Silence stretched, taut and fragile. Finally, Mateo exhaled. "Bianchi knows how to disappear. He's counting on me choosing the fastest solution. And you won't." Chiara said, "I can't," he admitted. The truth landed between them, heavy and irrevocable. That afternoon, Mateo made calls that unsettled men who had trusted him for decades. He canceled long-standing arrangements, pulled support from operations that once guaranteed stability. He redirected resources toward a single objective: containment, not annihilation. Rocco confronted him privately. "You're burning bridges. I'm choosing which ones to keep," Mateo replied. And her, Rocco asked. "What happens when this ends?" Mateo didn't answer. He couldn't. The trap was set not with bullets, but with patience. Bianchi took the bait 3 nights later. A lead surfaced through a channel he believed compromised an informant offering evidence tied to Mateo's ports. The location was neutral ground, public enough to discourage open violence, isolated enough to allow mistakes. Mateo went alone. Chiara knew before he told her. "You can't," she said, standing in his path. "That's exactly what he wants. I'm not walking into a trap," Mateo replied calmly. "I'm closing it. You're bleeding power for this," she said. "And when you come back, if you come back, you won't be the same." He studied her, the way he always did when deciding whether truth outweighed risk. "Neither will you." The words carried a weight neither of them could ignore. When Mateo left, the dogs did not follow. They stayed with Chiara, restless but obedient, sensing the fracture and choosing her side without hesitation. Hours passed. Then more. The call came just before dawn. Bianchi was alive, but no longer untouchable. Mateo returned with blood on his hands that wasn't his own. He said little. Chiara read the outcome in the way his shoulders carried the weight of finality. "He won't come for you again," he said quietly. "At what price?" she asked. He looked away. Later, Rocco delivered the rest. "We lost 2 allies. 1 port will change hands by the end of the month." Chiara closed her eyes. "You dismantled your own shield." Mateo met her gaze. "I built another." That night, Chiara sat alone on the terrace, the sea dark and endless below. Dante joined her, resting his head against her leg. She stroked his ear absently, the steady rhythm grounding her thoughts. Mateo appeared beside her without sound. For a long moment, neither spoke. "You should leave," he said finally. She didn't turn. "Because I'm safe now. Because you won't be," he replied. "Not with me." She faced him then, seeing the cost etched into his expression, the lines deepened by choices he could not undo. "You don't get to decide when I run, and you don't get to decide how many people bleed for you." The words cut, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Chiara inhaled slowly. "I never asked you to protect me, and I never planned to," Mateo said. "That's the problem." They stood too close, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. The dogs watched, alert but calm, as if understanding that something irreversible had already occurred. I can't stay, Chiara said softly. Not like this. Matteo nodded once. I know. The acceptance hurt more than resistance would have. She left the terrace first. In the days that followed, preparations were made without announcement. Matteo's world recalibrated, tightening around losses he would never publicly acknowledge. Chiara moved quietly through the estate, touching walls, memorizing light, committing to memory the calm she had helped build. On the final evening, she found Matteo in the kennels. They're different, she said, watching the dogs rest in easy sprawl. You did that too. He shook his head. You did. Then don't undo it. Their eyes met, something fragile passing between them. He reached out, stopping just short of touching her hand. I don't know how to protect you without destroying myself, he said. And I don't know how to stay without becoming what you fear, she replied. The truth settled between them, undeniable. Outside, the sea kept its secrets. Inside, two people who had learned how to stop stood at the edge of a choice neither had wanted, but both understood. Protection, once given, always demanded a price, and they were about to learn just how much it would cost to walk away. Chiara left before sunrise, not in secret, not chased by guards or hidden by shadows. Matteo arranged a car, a driver he trusted, documents that would hold under scrutiny. He did not walk her to the gate. He watched from the upper terrace as the engine came to life, as the headlights cut a clean path through the morning fog. Dante stood beside him, ears forward, body still. Nero paced once, then stopped. Virgil lay down, chin on his paws, eyes never leaving the road. She chose this, Matteo said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. The car disappeared beyond the bend. Something inside the estate exhaled. Something else went silent. The days that followed were measured, efficient, empty. Matteo resumed meetings. Territory stabilized, though never fully recovered. Men adapted to the new balance, learning where his patience ended and where it no longer began. He did not rage. He did not punish indiscriminately. That absence of excess unsettled people more than violence ever had. The dogs changed again, not backward, not broken, but quieter. They slept. They ate. They did not look for Chiara at every doorway, but they noticed her absence in the spaces between moments. Dante lingered longer by the kennels. Nero listened to sounds that were not there. Virgil followed Matteo more closely now, his vigilance precise but unburdened. Rocco observed it all without comment. One evening, as Matteo reviewed reports that no longer felt urgent, Rocco finally spoke. You gave up ground for her. Yes, Matteo replied. And she left anyway. Matteo did not look up. That doesn't make it a mistake. Rocco studied him, then nodded once. You're different. So are they, Matteo said, glancing toward the kennels. So am I. Weeks passed. Chiara did not vanish. She stayed close enough to be real, far enough to be safe. She found work with a rehabilitation center on the outskirts of Naples, one that specialized in dogs deemed irredeemable. The irony did not escape her. The first time she knelt in a concrete enclosure and raised her hand, she felt the familiar stillness settle into her bones. She thought of Matteo more often than she allowed herself to admit. In moments of quiet, she replayed his restraint, his silence, the way he had let her go without conditions. That choice haunted her more than any threat ever had. One afternoon, a familiar shape appeared at the edge of the center's yard. Rocco Santos waited by the fence, hands visible, posture neutral. Chiara felt her pulse quicken, but she did not run. He's not here, Rocco said. I know, she replied. He sent me to ask a question. Rocco continued. Not to deliver a message. She folded her arms loosely, then asked, Are you safe? The simplicity of it caught her off guard. She answered honestly. Yes, Rocco nodded. He hoped you'd say that. And you, she asked. Do you trust me now? A pause. Then I trust his judgment. That was as close to an apology as she would ever receive. When Rocco left, Chiara stood for a long time by the fence, watching dust settle where his car had been. She realized then that the distance she had created was no longer only protection. It was hesitation. Matteo felt the shift before the call came. It arrived late one evening, a number he did not recognize, the voice on the other end steady but unfamiliar. "She's been followed." The world narrowed. "Is she hurt?" Mateo asked. "No," the man replied. "But someone asked questions. Old ones." Mateo closed his eyes briefly. Bianchi's shadow did not die easily. He made arrangements with precision that night not to retaliate, not to reclaim, but to ensure the perimeter around Chiara remained clean and invisible. He did not go to her. That choice mattered. Days later, Chiara stood on a quiet street overlooking the sea, the air sharp with salt. She felt the presence before she saw him. Mateo stood a few steps away, unarmed, his posture open in a way that would have been unthinkable months ago. "I didn't come to ask you back," he said. She turned slowly. "Then why are you here to tell you that you were right?" Mateo replied. "Stopping didn't make me lose everything." She searched his face, seeing the truth etched there. And it showed me what was worth keeping." Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not strained, honest. "I won't cage you," he continued. "Not with walls, not with fear. If you come back, it's because you choose to. If you don't, I won't follow." Chiara felt something loosen in her chest. "You've learned how to let go." "I've learned how not to take," he corrected. She took a breath, the decision forming not as a leap, but as alignment. "I won't come back to the woman I was." She said, "I wouldn't recognize her." Mateo replied. They stood there as the sun dipped low, the horizon bleeding gold into blue. No promises were made, no conditions were set. Only truth, laid bare and unguarded. When they parted, it was without urgency. Back at the estate, Dante lifted his head as Mateo returned. He watched the man closely, then rested again, satisfied. Nero shifted in his sleep. Virgil exhaled, deep and even. Change had already happened. That night, Chiara lay awake listening to the sea, understanding at last that endings did not always mean loss. Sometimes, they were the quiet preparation for something that could finally begin without fear. Between letting go and coming back, there was a space. And in that space, both of them learned how to breathe. Chiara returned to the estate without announcement. No convoy, no escort, just a quiet car rolling through the gates in the late afternoon, the sun lowering itself gently over the hills, as if careful not to disturb what had taken root there. She stepped out alone, breathing in the familiar mix of salt, stone, and something steadier now absence of fear. The dogs knew before anyone else did. Dante lifted his head from the shade of the olive tree and froze, ears pricked, body still. Nero rose next, tail stiff with disbelief. Virgil followed more slowly, cautious, as if afraid that moving too fast might break the moment. Then Chiara smiled. She didn't call them, she didn't open her arms. She simply stood where she was, grounded, present, allowing the choice to be theirs. They crossed the distance together. Dante reached her first, pressing his forehead to her chest with a weight that was not demand, but greeting. Nero circled once before sitting, eyes locked on hers. Virgil leaned into her side, solid and calm. No urgency, no guarding, just recognition, from the terrace above. Mateo watched. He didn't move. He had learned that some moments demanded stillness, not command. He stayed where he was as Chiara knelt, her hands threading through familiar fur, her breath slowing to match theirs. He felt something ease in his chest that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with trust. When she finally stood, she looked up and met his gaze across the distance. That was the invitation. Mateo descended the steps without hurry, aware of every instinct urging him to close the space faster, to claim what had returned. He ignored them. When he stopped in front of her, there was no tension left to mask the truth. "You came back," he said. "I did," Chiara replied. Not because she owed him, not because she needed protection, because she chose to stand where she could breathe fully, and because he had learned how to make room for that. They walked the grounds together as evening settled, the dogs drifting ahead and behind in loose, easy patterns. Nothing needed to be said about what had been lost. Territory could be reclaimed, power reshaped. What mattered had already survived the reckoning. "I won't stay the way things were,"
Kiara said quietly as they reached the terrace. I wouldn't want you to, Mateo answered. I'll come and go, she continued. I'll work where I choose. I won't disappear when it's convenient. He nodded. And I won't follow when you leave. She studied his face, searching for the old hunger, the instinct to bind and possess. She found restraint instead, not absence of desire, but discipline born of respect. Then we understand each other, she said. That night, the estate slept differently. Doors remained open, guards moved with a lighter touch. The dogs chose their places without instruction, settling near Kiara but no longer tethered to her presence. Mateo joined them later, sitting on the stone floor without concern for appearances. Dante's head resting against his knee while Nero slept nearby, and Virgil watched the stars. Kiara observed him from the doorway, the quiet miracle of it catching her breath. You've changed, she said. So have you, Mateo replied. That was the point. In the days that followed, life found a new rhythm. Kiara worked mornings at the rehabilitation center and returned in the evenings, sometimes staying, sometimes leaving again before dawn. Mateo did not ask where she went. He did not monitor her movements. The dogs adapted seamlessly, their calm no longer fragile, their trust no longer exclusive. Rocco noticed first. They're balanced, he said one afternoon, watching Dante rest in the sun. All of them. Mateo understood what he meant. Weeks later, as summer deepened, Mateo hosted a gathering on the terrace, not a display of power, but an acknowledgement of survival. The people who attended noticed the difference. Conversations flowed without tension. Laughter appeared where it never had before. Fear had been replaced by something quieter, more dangerous to enemies who relied on chaos. Later, as the guests departed, Kiara and Mateo stood alone at the edge of the grounds, the sea dark and endless below. I don't need promises, Kiara said softly. I don't offer them lightly, Mateo replied. She took his hand, then not as surrender, but as alignment. His grip was steady, open, no pressure, no claim. The dogs gathered around them, not as sentinels, but as witnesses. In that moment, there was no devil and no savior, no captive and no captor. Only two people who had learned that power without restraint was destruction, and love without freedom was just another cage. The world beyond the gates remained dangerous. It always would. But inside, something rare had been built, something that did not rely on fear to exist. As night settled fully, Kiara leaned into Mateo's side, and he allowed himself, at last, to rest. Not because the threats were gone, but because he no longer believed that stopping meant losing everything. Some monsters learn how to be gentle. Some women learn how to stay without disappearing. And when both happen at once, the ending doesn't arrive with noise or spectacle. It arrives quietly, and it stays.